Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Kingdom of Denmark, the United Arab Emirates, Adelphi, and UN University, I'd like to welcome you to this ministerial event on climate, peace, and security in the Sahel and small island developing states. My name is Adam Day, and I'm honored and very pleased to be here as your moderator from UN University. Minister, please welcome Mr. Sodieta just arrived. And the discussion today really focuses on a key issue facing the world, which is how is climate change compounding security risks in vulnerable and conflict-affected parts of the world. And unfortunately, this is not a future-pointing event. Rising sea levels, erratic rainfall, desertification, coral bleaching, extreme weather, all of these are combining to create compound risks to livelihoods and stability in many regions of the world, and indeed everywhere in the world we're seeing these dynamics. And today's event is a chance to look closely at two regions that are uniquely affected by climate change. The Sahel, which is experiencing far higher than average global warming rates, rapid desertification and extreme weather, and small island developing states, which are the most susceptible to the impacts of rising sea levels and extreme weather, and they have been for decades. These risks are increasingly being recognized at the international level. Just this morning, the Security Council convened on the issue of climate security, and there will be discussions on a thematic resolution led by the Irish in the coming days, which will hopefully build on more than a decade of work in the Security Council. And of course, in only a few weeks, COP26 in Glasgow will be seeking new commitments to help some of these countries, including some represented here, to cope with the existential threats posed by climate change. At the same time, the specific ways that climate change is influencing security risks is poorly understood. And we've seen in many parts of the world that lack of understanding has influenced the policy and programmatic responses by countries. And that's why countries on the front line of climate security issues, the countries that are represented here today, really offer us important lessons on how policy and programmatic responses can be done and are already being done. And today is really a chance to learn from those countries and their experiences, and also understand how key international actors and those that are on the front line of supporting climate security responses, also represented here today, are shifting their priorities to meet those needs. So I'm honored today to be joined by the event's co-hosts, Jeppe Kofod, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Kingdom of Denmark, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the Minister and Special Envoy for Climate from the United Arab Emirates. Welcome. I'm also very pleased to welcome a really wonderful panel. It's hard to call this group of illustrious ministers a panel, but a group, including Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, the Foreign Minister of Mauritania, Abdullahi Diop, the Foreign Minister of Mali, Aminat Fauna, the Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Technology of the Maldives, and Ina Marie Eriksson Sodieta, the Foreign Minister of Norway. Welcome. We're also joined by globally recognized climate security experts from Adelphi and the Sustainable Pacific Consultancy, who will offer a video in a bit. So let's jump straight in. Minister Kofod, the floor is yours for some introductory remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Adam, and thank you so much, distinguished colleagues, all ministers, to be here with me today. I really look forward to this discussion, and a special thanks also to Ireland for hosting the open security debate on climate and security, the Security Council earlier today, as you alluded to. I think it's very key that the Council continues to focus on security risk posed to caused by climate change. And I'm very happy that we can be able to bring countries together from both Sahel and SIDS to regions that are heavily affected by climate change. My hope is today's discussion is that we can identify how we can take action against climate-related security risks, while fragile states bear the burden of the negative impacts of climate change. Finding solutions must be, in my opinion, a collective global responsibility. This requires a renewed collective commitment to multilateral solutions. We need to learn from and help each other, sharing experiences, best practices, and that's also the purpose of today. Climate change is the defining challenge of our time. It is becoming clear that it's also a defining security challenge, and I therefore look forward to listening and learning from your experience today. discuss how we can move forward on the issue together. So thank you so much. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to turn to Minister Al-Jaber, and just to start by saying that the UAE is joining the Security Council in January. You've named climate security as one of your top priorities. You've also put a unique focus on climate security in your offer to host COP28 in 2023. And in all of these, you've cited UAE's experience in climate investment in many of the regions we're talking about today. And so this really positions you in such a good way to talk, and we'd be really interested to hear about how those investments and how those priorities are addressing some of the security risks that we're seeing today in these contexts. Thank you, Minister. Please.
Thank you, Adam, for the kind words and the introduction. And thank you for the invitation. It is indeed my pleasure to be surrounded by such esteemed ministers representing their respective countries, and to also have the opportunity to co-host such an important meeting with Minister Kofod. Everyone knows that Denmark has been an important key player in the advancement of climate action globally. I have personally worked very closely with the Danish government as well as with private sector companies in Denmark, and we have learned a big deal from that relationship and partnership. And I thank His Excellency the Minister for always including the UAE in such very important dialogue. In the UAE, the way we view addressing global challenges and promoting global development is very high on our agenda, and it is a view shared by everybody, and it's in a way a mirror image of how the UAE addresses such global challenges. We're very focused on making practical contributions. We're very focused on being results driven. We contribute to the development of policy and also contributing to humanitarian assistance that reflects real situations on the ground. The UAE's climate partnerships have focused on island countries as well as the Sahel because it is no secret. I mean, they have been among the first to feel the impacts of climate change. Our assistance was initially focused on enhancing energy self-sufficiency and developing the low-carbon market. We delivered over $1 billion of assistance for renewable energy projects around the world, including 32 SIDS and across the Sahel. Our focus going forward when it comes to our development programs as well as the assistance programs from the UAE to the world is going to be centered around ensuring resilience and adaptation, and in parallel with our renewable energy assistance programs, the UAE has also provided an equal amount of humanitarian relief for climate-related impacts. In the Caribbean, our renewable energy projects in Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica became part of the reconstruction efforts after the devastation caused by hurricanes. The fact is, as weather patterns become more extreme, climate impacts are increasingly affecting a range of issues from food security to water security, migration to social cohesion. In other words, climate concerns are becoming real security concerns, and we need to upgrade our response accordingly. As such, the UAE have committed significant resources to help address this challenge. And it is encouraging to hear the growing consensus on the Security Council on this point, and we are very prepared to play our effective role as part of the Council and to reiterate our full commitment and support. My hope is that this alignment will allow us to accelerate proactive measures to prevent and mitigate climate threats to security. And of course, technology will play a critical role in helping address such challenges. We also need to increase investments in climate-smart agriculture and technology to safeguard the food and water of vulnerable nations. This is a key goal of of AIM, the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, the initiative that the UAE announced with the United States in April. And we are pleased that Denmark is an early supporter. They've been engaged since day one. And I would encourage all those present with us here today to consider joining us ahead of COP26. I would like to conclude by saying that the UAE will use its time on the Security Council to support efforts that treat climate threats with the same urgency as any other security threat. This is important for all countries, and we are committed to raising and acting on both the warnings of the solutions from vulnerable regions. The UAE will take the same approach as host of COP28. We want to leverage our role as a global convener on progressive climate action to rally the international community around the need to approach climate risks as security risks and invest accordingly. The experiences of SIDS and the Sahel have taught us that climate action must be a top priority on our agenda and for global security. And this nexus approach has a direct positive impact on global development. I thank you again.
Thank you, Minister Jabber, and thank you, Minister Kofa. And I hope, Mr. Jabber, we can come back to some of those points that you call practical contributions also later in the discussion. Your points on resilience and agriculture, I think, are very important to come back to. To help move this discussion forward on the basis of the latest science and policy research, we'll watch two brief video presentations. The first by Janani Vivekananda, the head of Climate Security and Diplomacy Program at Adelphi, one of the co-sponsors of this event, and Coral Pasisi, the director of the Sustainable Pacific Consultancy and the president of the Tokyo Niue, a nonprofit organization focused on ocean sustainable management. And hopefully our
Hello, my name is Janani Vivekananda, and I'm the Head of Programme for Climate Security and Diplomacy at Adelphi. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today about one of the most pressing societal issues of our time, the impacts of climate change on peace and stability. There's ample evidence to show that the effects of climate change exacerbate important drivers of conflict, challenging the capacities of states and of people to cope peacefully. Particular attention has been paid to the Sahel zone, where risks posed by climate impacts, such as increased temperature rise and more variable rainfall patterns, include increased tensions related to climate-induced migration, disputes over water allocation, the impacts on states' capacities to act, and the growth of armed opposition groups in response, as well as worsening conflicts between different livelihood groups. However, small island states have been largely left out of this discussion. And this is surprising given the specific vulnerability of SIDS to the environmental and social impacts of climate change, from sea level rise to displacement. And this is also surprising given the impressive amounts of local research and indigenous knowledge on this issue. So it's commendable that this session puts a focus on filling this gap, linking knowledge to action. Climate risks to peace and stability are not only future risks. They're already visible today, from the Sahel to SIDS around the world, and they're projected to increase. But here's the rub. Whilst we're beginning to acknowledge these risks at a conceptual level, our abilities to develop risk-informed strategies and responses are not keeping step, despite numerous high-level calls to action, including from the UN Secretary General and a number of Security Council resolutions and debates, such as the most recent one called by Ireland. Our capacities to assess, manage, and address existing and emerging climate fragility risks are lagging behind the changing climate risk landscape. Without adequate risk assessment, we're very likely underestimating the nature, the scale, and the scope of climate fragility risks. And perhaps even more critically, there are as yet no adequate institutional or governance mechanisms at a regional or a global level with a clearly defined mandate to respond to these risks. The AU and the RECs covering the Sahel and the Pacific Islands Forum are taking commendable steps in the right direction here, but there's still some distance to travel. While of course responses need to be context specific and locally informed, I'd like to highlight 4 guiding principles that could be applied consistently from the Sahel to the SIDS and beyond. The first is to ensure meaningful participation of civil society, in particular women, young people, people with disabilities, and those from other marginalized groups in the assessment of risks and dimensions of resilience, and in the planning and the implementation of responses. The second is to address the conflict sensitivity deficit of climate action. It's not simply a climate crisis, it's a socio-political crisis. We need to ensure that climate action takes account of conflict dynamics so that it does not inadvertently do harm to fragile peace and stability. Thirdly, we need to ensure that financing is more predictable, flexible, and prepared to fail, and importantly, not only focused in more stable regions, but also directed to more volatile regions. And fourthly, we need to make sure that all programs and strategies take account of both climate and conflict risks in a context-specific way. National top-down assessments will not work. Strategies and programming must be informed by locally grounded climate fragility risk assessments that reflect the dynamic nature of the risks and the opportunities involved. So while the challenges and the entry points from the Sahel to the SIDS are context-specific, one commonality which I can state with confidence is that locally informed, conflict-sensitive, and climate-proof interventions represent better value for money and offer a better chance of delivering lasting peace in our changing climate. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful further discussion.
Greetings from the Pacific. The security of maritime boundaries in the face of sea level rise is amongst the highest climate security issues on Pacific SIDS agendas in the region. This is because all Pacific SIDS are heavily dependent on the integrity and certainty of their blue economy and jurisdiction, and we are home to 4 of the lowest lying atolls in the world who average just 1 to 2 meters above sea level. So forum leaders have recently developed and endorsed a declaration on preserving maritime zones in the face of climate change related sea level rise, with the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea providing the basis for this declaration, to ensure that their maritime zones cannot be challenged or reduced as a result of climate-related sea level rise. The displacement of critical regional fish stocks is also a major issue. Our latest science and modelling suggests a significant displacement of tuna stocks eastwards and into the high seas by 2050 under high emission scenarios. This stands to threaten up to 20% of the revenues for governments who depend on these fishing access fees. It increases the risks of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, which is much harder to manage on the high seas, and it threatens to decrease an important source of food security for many Pacific SIDS who are looking at how they will supplement other degrading food sources like coastal fisheries, which millions of Pacific people depend on. So how can the UN system respond? All of us need to understand these unique manifestations of climate security from the perspective of those who are impacted the most. No single institution has to do everything, but every institution has to do something, and those contributions need to be done in a coherent and coordinated way, commensurate with the absorptive capacity of those who need this help the most. This requires focused and dedicated attention, helping to regularly inform all relevant stakeholders and ensuring tailored, coordinated responses. This has been the driving force behind the request of Pacific countries for a special representative or special envoy on climate security in the United Nations. I wish you well in your deliberations today on this most important topic. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And these interventions, I think, not only frame some of the commonalities between these regions, but also offer some concrete recommendations for what we should do, and I hope we can return to some of those. I'd now like to turn to Ismail Sheikh Ahmed, the Foreign Minister of Mauritania. And Minister, you have a very interesting profile for this panel, because not only do you represent Mauritania, an arid country with a large agricultural and herding sector, adjacent to some of the most turbulent regions in West Africa, but you also served as the UN's Special Envoy for Yemen and as a resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator in Syria, which are often 2 of the most cited climate hotspots. And so you can really speak from a range of experience on this. And we'd really be interested to hear how your thinking on climate has evolved over time, where you think the focus should be now in the Sahel, Middle East, North Africa, and we're really happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adam. And let me first start by thanking, of course, the United Arab Emirates and Denmark for inviting me, and the university, of course, the university, but also to emphasize how much I'm pleased to be my friend, Mr. Jabir. You know, United Arab Emirates, I'm proud to say it is always leading the way in many ways, and as this innovative and thinking out of the box on space, on women, gender issues, but also particularly now I'm very glad that you are putting this climate on your agenda for the Security Council. This is something really which is going to be a great threat to all our humanitarian existential issue. So again, of course, I don't need to speak about what Denmark has been doing or Norway and others, and I agree to my colleague from Mali and from obviously Maldives. I'm not going to read all of this. So I'm just going to say a few.
Thank you.
But I'm going to say a few notes to allow me. It's of course an honor to join today the discuss the climate security agenda through the prism of small island developing states, SEEDS, and the Sahel region. The Sahel region, I will focus on the Sahel a bit. The Sahel region is one of the poorest and most environmentally degraded in the world, and is considered one of the worst, most vulnerable regions to climate change, as temperature increases as projected to be 1.5 times higher than in the rest of the world. Since the 1970s, the Sahel has warmed twice as fast as the rest of the world. That comes with serious consequences for the livelihood of all Sahelians. The Sahel is heating up at an alarming rate. Environmental assets are literally evaporating, and rainfall is increasingly erratic, undermining access to water, fisheries, livestock, and agriculture. The fuels intercommunal tension and the symptom of this problem were becoming increasingly visible a decade ago in the form of large-scale displacement and growing hunger. A major drought in 2012 affected 18 million people across the region of the Sahel. In recent years, we have seen another effect of climate change, unprecedented flooding. So where we are having drought, force people from their home and deprive them from their livelihood. Flooding in 2020 has had a greater impact than any previous years for which data is available. Across West and Central Africa, nearly 2 million people in 13 countries were affected. Climate vulnerability is compounded by the region's high dependence on rain-fed agriculture and its natural resources to support food security and livelihood, rapid population growth, and chronic humanitarian crisis due to recurrent droughts, flooding, food insecurity, epidemic, and violent conflict. Of course, it's not a secret that the people in the Sahel, like others in the SEEDS, are among the least responsible for global warming, yet they will suffer the most from its consequences. As I said, I promised not to try to read all of this. Let me say a few other things. In recent years, countries in the Sahel have also faced dramatic deterioration of security, high food prices, as well as the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19. These shocks have deepened people's vulnerability and challenged their access to food. As a result of UN estimate that a record of 29 million people will need assistance, particularly in the 2021 year. The confluence of conflict, governance issues, chronic underdevelopment, poverty, demographic pressure, and the impact of climate change and livelihood are driving millions of to the fringes of survival. Countries in the Sahel, with the international community help, need to do more, to do better, and certainly to do smarter. We heard the minister speaking about smart investment, and to do it collectively. Few other points important, and particularly, I was pleased with the Adelphi speaker speaking about the link between meaningful participation, because I believe we need to address the cause, not merely respond to the symptom. The military response to ongoing conflict in the Sahel needs to be conducted in a way that protects, supports, and wins the backing of local communities. This is fundamental, the meaningful participation. There needs to be a much bigger investment in basic services, especially education. I would say girls' education, health, clean water, sanitation, and family planning. A healthy, better educated Sahelian can do much for themselves, which is preferred to relying indefinitely on external support. But to conclude, I would say our international partners have a moral obligation to support the Sahel face these challenges. Of course, my friend Mr. Job will accept that. Still, also, national authorities should do much better to respond to the aspiration of their citizens and to improve governance, particularly in fragile areas. What the colleague spoke about, this is a political issue before becoming just a climate issue. And finally, to conclude, I would say, in order to link the knowledge to action, because we know all of this, what I am telling you here is not new to you, to link it to a link, let's take the Sahel, and I would say the G5 countries, which are really facing today, and exactly are this illustration of the climate and conflict, security and climate. 2021, I repeat it, is not a good year in terms of rain. It has already proven to be very dispersed, not regular, and therefore we will need assistance. But it's not just, as I said, financial assistance. We need to do issues on governance, on education, but of course we need to have a more, as put here as the fourth point, more predictable finance in terms of addressing these issues. So I'm sorry, I know time is counted. I would have loved to go a bit further, but this is all what I can say for now. But I'm be glad to come back later if there is any issue to complete.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I think your points, especially on governance and also how to calibrate with the military response, is something I think would be really interesting to come back to. And I'd like to turn to your neighbor, geographically, Minister Diop of Mali. And really, Mali is facing some of the most acute climate change and has also undergone waves of instability over the last 10 years, including significant armed group mobilization, farmer-herder conflicts, and political unrest earlier this year. And we'd be really interested to hear how your government sees the current risks, what priorities you've identified, and what the international community can do better to support your country in the context of this nexus of climate and security risks. And just to say thank you again for coming to this event.
Thank you so much, and thanks to Ismail also for just giving us the background and the drivers for this tension between the climate and insecurity. I want also to just recognize UAE and Denmark and UN University for your leadership on this matter. I will just focus on 2-3 things. I think Ismail has covered most of the things that I would like to say. I could have just give him my time. But where I will start is this: the climate-related issues led us to more inter-community tension because of the rise in the population, but also the impact of the climate has created more tension among communities in many areas, and these tensions are becoming more and more violent with massive displacement of people, specifically in area like Mali. For that, we think it's very important for us to have a different type of approach. Definitely, we need to link now the issue of insecurity to development. To development issues, and keeping in mind that the military option only to insecurity is too limited, that we need also to look at what are the development issues, creating opportunity, water, sanitation issues, job and opportunity for our young people. For me, insecurity and development have to be linked to allow us to come up with a more holistic approach in recognizing that what is important in countries like Mali also, I think our colleagues from Adelphi touched about it, I will just focus on that element, is the capacity of state to respond to this crisis. And this is a major challenge in our country like Mali, where we know the state is almost absent in many areas of the country and not even having the ability and to manage this crisis and to provide the services that the population needs. And for that, we need some of the key drivers that we need to focus on to make that happen. Is first, in my view, is the question of having a functional administration at the local level. Being able to increase the capacity of our administration to provide for the services for our people. For me, this is an important barometer of trust between the state and the citizen. And in many instances, this tension are increased because the state is not there to mediate and to provide a solution. Ismail touched on it. The second part is the governance. Governance is governance and accountability is a key important element because because there is a significant gap in many of our countries, specifically at local level, between even the center and the local, and even at the local level between the state and citizen and other groups. For me, that is something that we need really to work to ensure that we can build those trusts between the public servant and the citizen that we serve. And for that to happen, Ismail touched on this issue of the capacity of the state to provide for social basic services. He talked about water, electricity, health, so all educations. All these issues are very, very critical because in many areas in Mali, for instance, people feel abandoned. and they feel abandoned, and finally they have to take their own fate in their own hands, and this creates much more problem. And this is where also we see the role for the international community, because there is a big challenge. Our countries are already, I think Ismail and myself, we belong to the G5 Sahel group. We realize that today we are investing not less than 23% of our budget on the military and defense issues, where we need also partners to come in to help us to increase our capacity to provide these basic social services. So we think the lack of security also of the population and the lack of effective presence of the state create a challenge. So if the state is not there to provide security, this where in many areas in Mali today, we have irregular groups, we have militias. So they have decided to take the security in their own hands. So you have this tension between pastoralists and farmers. So they just try to resolve their own problems, but we know there are economic issues, but also there are political issues. Unless we are able to make sure that the state is present, not only present, but to stay, because sometimes we deploy, and then we have really to leave the places because we don't have the capacity to stay enough. So in my view, I think, I know the issue can cover many areas, but we have really to make sure we have a holistic approach. We link development to insecurity, but at the practical level, let us look at the capacity of the state to provide services, to provide security, to create an environment where we can mediate and mitigate the impact, because sometimes there is decrease in rainfall, decrease in agricultural production, and we have also displacement, massive displacement of population, which create disruption. So the state has to be there to be able to organize development and to create dialogue and to put in place governance systems that can build trust and hope for our young people. So that's what I just wanted to add, but I think Ismail have touched on most of the points for me.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I think it's such a frank assessment that you've given us. And also one of the things we found in our research is often states are worried about securitizing the climate agenda. And what you've clearly pointed out is we need to do that to a certain extent and understand those links. And I think your assessment of what the needs are is refreshing. And really important for us to take note of. And I heard the word governance, I think 5 or 6 times, and that's certainly something we want to come back to. I'd like to now turn to the Indian Ocean and offer the floor to Minister Shauna of the Maldives. And your country is really on the rapidly moving front lines of climate change in a slightly different way. And you and your government have been sounding the alarm now really for a long time about the precariousness of the situation there. Those of us who have followed this issue for a while might remember your underwater cabinet meeting of 2009. There's some great photos of that I encourage you all to look at. But we'd really be interested in hearing what climate security issues your country is facing, including human security, and whether there are any common lessons we can start to learn about governance responses, governmental responses to some of these dynamics. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister.
Thank you. It's really a great pleasure to be here with very important, to discuss an important topic, particularly for the Maldives. I think everyone knows the Maldives for a holiday destination, for how beautiful it is. But unfortunately, I think we need to have a very honest discussion about the future of the Maldives because of what's happening around us, because of what's happening in terms of climate change. It really is an existential threat for us. We live through it every day, every hour of it. I've been the environment minister for just a couple of months, but most of the work that I deal with having to deal with adaptation issues that related to environment, water security issues, food security issues, what's happening to our fisheries sector as well. 80% of our islands are less than just a meter above sea level. So we don't have a higher ground to really run into. 90% of the islands report flooding annually. Over 50% of the islands are facing severe erosion. And there's really no other explanation that I can give but climate change is really what's causing all of these things. Nearly 50% of all our housing structures are just within 100 meters from the shoreline. which makes us particularly vulnerable to coastal flooding, tidal swells, even tsunamis as well. And when the Asian tsunami did happen, that really, I think, was a moment for us to really think about how vulnerable we are to these things. So our income, our food, our survival really depends on these vulnerabilities. And I don't think I need to go on about explaining how important it is. So the main point I would like to make is it really is indisputable that human activities are causing this climate change. And we really need to reverse this, because for us, it is a national security issue for us now, because it is an existential threat for us. Food security has been threatened. If you think about water, agriculture, and fishing, none of the inhabited islands have clean drinking water. So we have to provide clean drinking water in bottles and other forms, and we have to depend heavily on very expensive technologies such as desalination to provide clean drinking water for people. We have to, because of salination and temperature increases, and also in frequent extreme weather events, our agriculture sector has also been affected by it. And we import most of our food as well. So we are a country that is heavily dependent on imports. We're a country that's heavily dependent on fishing as well. And our coral reefs, in my lifetime, I have seen the degradation of what's happening to our coral reefs. By snorkeling alone, you just can't see what we used to see even just 10 years ago. So you have to dive deeper to see the more healthier, beautiful corals that we used to. And our fishing depends so much on the health of the reefs. And if the reefs are being, if you're losing our reefs, that means our fishing is being affected. And we are seeing this. Bait fisheries have gone down significantly, and our fishermen are having to go further and further to find fish stocks as well. So yes, this is an existential threat. This is unfortunately not a topic we've had even at home discussed how important it is. And because of all these things, we are also having to spend quite a lot of government funds on adaptation, on critical infrastructure for us to for protection at island level and to provide food as well. And because we are a middle income country, we don't have access to concessional financing from development banks. And we have not had a very good experience in having access to finance from other multilateral organizations as well. And I think all of you would understand how long it takes to access these funds. And as a small island country, as a country that's in the front line, we have just received approval for 2 projects from the GCF. And I think that is what's concerning. We need immediate access to these things. We need direct access to these finances. Otherwise, with the impact, what has happened with COVID particularly, it's really worrying, because our debt burden has doubled as well. And for us to spend more on adaptation, and also now has really complicated things with what has happened with COVID. So I hope you understand where we're getting at. There is really an urgent need to have more access for countries like the Maldives and AOCs and SIDS to have more access to these things. At local level, we are doing what we can to reduce our emissions. We have a target to achieve net zero by 2030. Even we have the right support from the world. All we need is just access to it. We have plans to phase out single-use plastics by 2023. We have a target to protect 20% of our marine resources by 2030, but the Maldives alone can't do it. But my question also is, if we can do it, I think the entire world can do it as well. So very, very pleased to be here.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I think one of the points I take away from your comments is how the pathways for climate change and insecurity are often through human security. You talk about fisheries, you talk about agriculture, you talk about the vulnerabilities that you're facing. And I noticed several people taking very close notes when you talked about the need for different forms of financing for that. And so I hope we can come back to that also. And I'd now like to turn to Minister Surieda from Norway, and really as one of the largest international donors globally, a recognized leader on the issue of climate security, we'd be really interested in your reactions to these briefings, and really what Norway's response has been to this growing body of evidence that climate is really driving instability in many of these regions. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I will not spend time on the analysis on how the situation is, because I think that has been very well underlined by everyone around the table here. So I will just connect a couple of comments to what you have said. And I'm going to take as a starting point the Security Council meeting we had this morning. The Irish presidency gathered and convened, I would say, quite a high-level group. And it was very interesting to see how forward-leaning many of the countries were. And you have to keep in mind that if you go back 5 or 10 years, putting climate and security on the agenda of the Security Council was quite an uphill struggle. It wasn't really something that came very naturally. So I think that what has happened over the past years is really that the Council, or the countries on the Council, have matured in discussing these issues, which I think is very good. So we have had this as one of our 4 top priorities for our Council work for this term. And we have seen also that, the US leadership is back, and I think it's quite important. When I heard Blinken today saying that the issue is no longer whether this belongs on the Security Council agenda, but what the Security Council can do. And I think that marks quite a big shift in their approach, and I think it is an extremely important shift. Yes, there are still countries who do not want to see, for instance, a thematic resolution on climate and security, like China and Russia and partly also India. But at the same time, I think it is possible to get something done now that more countries on the Council, also among the Permanent 5, are positive towards dealing with this situation. What we have been trying to do from the Norwegian side is, of course, 2 things. On the outside of the Council, we have been focusing more and more of our development aid to climate adaptation, mitigation, and financing. So we will now double our climate financing and also triple our climate adaptation support. And I would say more and more is channeled to these efforts. And the reason is very simple. If you look at 20 of the world's countries who are most affected by climate change, 10 of them are also in conflict. So it's obviously a link here that we need to focus on. The second thing we're doing is within the Council, in addition to raising the issue and putting it at the forefront of our priorities, I sincerely believe that one of the best things we can do to get the Council to actually act on this is to be as concrete as possible. So we are funding independent research from the Norwegian Foreign Policy Institute, the Stockholm Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, and also Adelphi, just to make sure that the Council at all times has updated, timely and relevant information about how climate change is affecting the specific country contexts on the Council's agenda. Because I think if we continue to discuss this as a kind of a general idea or a general topic, I think it's very easy for the Council or those in the Council who do not want to see this on their agenda to just say, well, this is just one other topic that we do not want to deal with. If we make it concrete, it will be impossible to actually ignore it. And that is why we are focusing on that and using that information and network as well. I think it's very important to remember that this is not only about the Security Council acting on a conflict that has erupted. It's about peace diplomacy, it's about preventing conflict, and it is actually possible to make that happen. So I think that it's a very important issue to take down from the more general discussions and into the more concrete discussions. And you have all provided very good examples of what is happening. And as you very rightly point out, the capacity of a state to manage a crisis, to provide basic services and security is maybe at the heart of why climate change could end in conflict. Because if that is not in place, you very easily have an open door for extremists and terrorist groups and others who want to prey on a very vulnerable situation. My last point is on what you said about the need for direct and immediate access to climate financing. That has been one of the things that we've been working on in the Green Climate Fund, because there is actually not necessarily a lack of money, but it's a lack of access. And to simplify the procedures for accessing the funding has been a core task for us, because we know that the money doesn't do any good if it's not able to reach those who actually need it. So we're working on this on multiple fronts, and I mean, to me it was really an eye-opener if it hadn't been it before, when I went to visit Tuvalu in 2019. And I've also visited Sahel several times, and the challenges may be different, storm and hurricanes and drought, for instance, but the consequences are the same. And when you see how vulnerable many of these places are, and their ability to withstand climate change, and there is absolutely nothing you can do, because you have 1 meter, and that's all you have. Or as in Tuvalu's case, a 10-meter distance from the one end of the island to the other end at the narrowest point, and everything will just flood over. So it's really, it's not a choice. It's just, as you said, an existential threat. And to make the Council also realize that many of these challenges are mutually reinforcing, that displacement can lead to fight for resources, that drought could take away livelihoods. All of these things are quite, I think, obvious to us sitting here, but I think that all good forces need to work in the Council also to make this not only a reality for us, but for the Council as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Sudier. And one of the things that struck me about your comments was not only the evolution in the Council of this issue, but how important it's become. Rather than being a liability, it's now a point that Council members gather around. And you see the Taoiseach today leading discussions. It's really gone from an issue that's been pushed to the side to now one that you run on as part of your platform. And that's a big accomplishment. And I think part of that you also see within the UN system. The climate security mechanism is now created. It has gone from something that's seen as a risky thing to talk about to one where you can get a group like this talking about it. And that's a big step. And I just encourage everybody to read the Cypria Delphi briefs on these issues that you're funding. They're really wonderful ways of teeing up country-specific climate security risks. And I hope we can come back to this point about access to financing, because I could see Minister Shauna taking very close notes on this. And I think it's a very important issue that you're leading on. I'd like to now turn back to Minister Kofod, who has been, his country has been leading on climate and climate security for a long time, including hosting COP and convening events like this, and really one of the loudest and most important voices that we have on this issue. We'd really love to hear your reactions to this group, how you feel this issue has moved, where you think the science points us, and really your thoughts on all of this. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you to all of you for, first of course, explaining the urgency of the matter, and from various angles, both whether it's an existential threat for the Maldives, or it's fueling already complicated conflicts in the Sahel. So let me make a few remarks, and then I think we should open up for debate. First of all, I agree very much with what also Ine, the Prime Minister of Norway, said here. We need to do what we can to, in a concrete way, put climate and security on the Council agenda, and I think we can do some also operational things, like, for example, we need to monitor developments within this climate security nexus, and a regular report, for example, by the Secretary General could improve our ability, I think, to take action on risk that may occur, also in a preventive basis. I also think we should look from UN side and as a UN community how peacekeeping operations and also our special political missions could consider, how climate-related risk, how they affected, whether it's relevant, and we are, I think, right now among Nordic colleagues exploring how we can support UN missions with climate and security experts as well, so in a concrete way. Then I just also want to emphasize that what we do in Denmark, we need to, in a way, translate our knowledge. We know challenges into concrete actions, and also empower some of the most vulnerable countries and populations. We have, from our side, allocated 100 million euro over 4 years to address the nexus between climate change, conflict, and displacement in the Sahel. Because, as was also explained by Foreign Minister Diop, how important that is. And I hope we can also learn lessons from these type of actions that can guide our policies. And then also on climate finance, because I know, Adam, it's something you want to ask. We must increase our finance for adaptation in vulnerable regions, of course. And in Sahel, we see this negative impacts on security-related effects of climate change. And in many cities also, climate change is really existential. So my government has also announced a significant increase in public grant-based climate finance for developing countries, of which at least 60% of this is earmarked for adaptation. I think it's very important. So just to say that I think the diversity of people around this table explaining how urgent it is give me good hope that we can act on this, and we have concrete ideas that can make a difference. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Minister. And we do have a few minutes for discussion. One of the things I wanted to draw from these presentations really is this fact that climate-driven risks often present themselves as development problems. And so erratic rainfall can lead to crop failure can lead to instability. Extreme weather can destroy arable land, driving people into new areas and creating new strains. And this makes it often difficult to develop early, accurate responses, and the risks of maladaptation, bad responses, are very high. And especially from our colleagues from the Sahel and the Maldives, but also anyone here, I'd really be interested to hear what types of programming seems to work, what types of approaches have been effective in reducing risks. And then related to that, several people have mentioned this idea of green growth and green programming, so employment based on sustainable economies. Often green growth is seen by some actors as something that's not efficient enough or cost effective enough to do development in fragile areas, but I think there may be examples from some of these regions where green growth is something that can be done effectively to build some of the responses and reduce risks. And in that context, I'd be very interested in what type of financing works. What sources of funding are really important for you as affected countries in building programs that work? Are there examples that we can draw from your own experiences where you think something has worked very well? Be really keen to hear any thoughts that any of you have from your various experiences.
I can try, why not? Just to share a bit of our experience in Mauritania, because obviously we say this without any arrogance. I think we have been at least successful in the region to maintain security within our own borders. Almost since 2011, there has been no major security incident in Mauritania. And I think if you ask me today among all our approach, obviously security is one of them. We say you have 4 interconnected, as my colleague said, pillars that you need to build on. The first of these pillars will be definitely by far the development element, which contains, of course, long-term approach on education or on health. The second big component, which responds to your question, is this community approach, but particularly the confidence of the community. Because if you gain the confidence of the community, but how do you gain it? You gain it by providing water, by having a state which is much closer to the community, by making the community themselves become informant to this, voluntary informant, not on the negative side, that they become themselves realizing that the terrorism is a very important element which is against them, not for them, because the terrorists have money and they sometimes provide. When we are absent, they provide themselves. And the third element of this approach is obviously the religious dialogue with youth people, because we are convinced, and I think those of us here who are Muslim will say that this has nothing to do with Islam. This interpretation is wrong interpretation. There is no religion that can allow you to kill innocent people. That's absolutely not true. And even when they speak about Sharia, that's not even the Sharia as provided. That's not the jihad as provided the Quran. So that dialogue has been able to gain a lot of young people, because they were embarked on this because of this youth population who are not seeing on your horizon. So that approach, the dialogue, but of course you don't do just dialogue and stop there. To accompany that with opportunities for youth, microfinance, and obviously down supporting all of that is a security approach, because of course you need to have a strong army, you have to have a strong state, and you can't speak with certain radical group because they are not also naive to say everything is there. There are some definitely. So when you have and I would say that as the base of the 4 pillars, that element of security, because at the end it supports all of them, and many of our partners, again, I quote here, Emirates and others have been clear to understand that importance of that element in the Sahel, because this issue is really a threat to all of us. The Sahel is so close to Europe today, it's so close, it's a heart, it's something happening on our eyes, which climate is only complicating. And we have the road of migration, which is coming to the Atlantic, because, the road in close to Libya has been better controlled now. Now we have a huge migration. Ask our Spanish friend, who will tell you this all the time at the EU. We have a huge migration coming, but mainly when we speak about, when we speak about the Pearl issue, for instance, in Mali or even Mauritania, it's not about religious. These people embarked on this is mainly because of a territory and climate issue, because of the water scarcity. They battle first because these are the liver against the agriculture. That constant battle is against water, is about existence, about climate. So climate there is very much at the heart of the issue. And obviously I will finish, because I know that's a key element, is obviously on this community approach. It's clear that in our approach, we have realized how much women are powerful driving force for the change, because they actually are the one who stay stable. They are one when they gain more, they provide it to the community rather than I'm sorry to say it's getting a second wife or going somewhere else. So it's clear also that investing in women education, investing in women association, and providing for them capacity, build the whole community capacity. Well, a bit long, but
no, thank you, Minister. And I know some of the ministers here have other places to be. This is high-level week, and I really appreciate the time you've given. I think we just have a couple more minutes if Minister Shauna or Minister Diop wants to add any points. Now is a great time.
Okay, thank you. I just point out one more thing. We are having a lot of environmental issues, particularly because of climate change in the Maldives, but we're also having other issues in terms of radicalization. And this is a huge problem for us. Just in May this year, we had a terrorist attack in the Maldives that was targeted to kill former President Mohamed Nasheed. And that is a turning point for us. What I want to point out is that we don't have the kind of financing that we need to really put into programs to prevent radicalization, counter and violent extremism, and issues of COVID and debt and all these things. But we also have urgent adaptation issues that we need to be addressing at home. But I think one of the lessons that we have learned is we need to move, as we are being affected by climate change, we need to introduce alternative livelihood programs in the Maldives. There are many people who are leaving fishing because it's no longer profitable or viable for them to sustain family and everything. We also need to have proper resource management, because there's a lot of pressure to the government, for instance, to have more development. And but we also need to protect these important ecosystems, because they are our natural protection as well. Another thing is for private sector to have access to financed through development banks, they also need guarantees as well. So this is something that we have been really speaking to World Bank and other financial institutions as well, because that's what we can't do. We can't keep giving sovereign guarantees to have this infrastructure developed that is needed. But if we have these guarantees provided through other means, then we can still keep borrowing at concessional rates.
Thank you so much. That's some very concrete steps that we can all think about. Minister Kip, would you like
if
to
I
add
can
anything?
attempt just to reply to a question about the programming. I just think we need to look at also in the programming some of these agrogeological zones or livelihood zones like Lake Chad Basin or Liptako Gourma or whatever. We have different Niger Basin as well, which require us to plan beyond individual states. We have seen in the Lake Chad Basin which have dried up. We have seen the problem that have created. Maybe in the program, if you look at it as a livelihood zone and plan and to look at what are the challenges, what are the issues, and how we can work collectively with those countries to provide programs. Some of that he talked about women issue, I think youth entrepreneurship, and also I think the issue of linking this to migration. If we can have programs looking at this particular area also, that can be a way also to provide some answers, because this has also an impact on managing our natural resources and providing hope for those young people not to land in the hands of terrorists as well.
Thank you so much, Minister. I would have loved to get more into the points about the Security Council that Minister Sudieta said, but I think we have to run to other meetings and really just, what this is the front edge of climate security, and what I think we'll be finding over the coming years is more and more countries will be coming around this table, and you see flooding in Germany, wildfires in the US and Australia, you've got unprecedented heat waves in the Middle East. This is coming at us very fast, and I hope this gives you all a sense of the urgency, but also a sense of how much is already happening and the steps that major donors and countries on the front line are taking. And I really like to thank Denmark, the United Arab Emirates for hosting this with Adelphi. And from the point of view of UN University, we're thrilled to have been part of this. Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of High Level Week.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.